The old walls of Vienna's Hofburg Palace could tell a million stories. They've seen emperors rise and fall, plots hatched in shadowy corners, and love affairs bloom under watchful eyes. But what if the deepest secrets, the driving forces of an entire dynasty, weren't hidden in dusty scrolls or whispered confessions, but in just a few carefully chosen words? The Habsburgs, a family that ruled vast stretches of Europe for centuries, weren't just about crowns and castles. They were about mottos, short punchy phrases that were meant to define their very souls, their ambitions, and sometimes their gravest fears. These aren't just historical footnotes. They are the ultimate personal branding etched into the very core of rulers who believed they were chosen for greatness. And some of them are truly wild. Number 8. Austria est imperar, orbi universo, or als Erdreich, ist Österreich interten. It was the 15th century, and Emperor Frederick III, a man who loved gardening and astronomy more than the messy business of governance, etched 5 mysterious letters onto everything he owned. His books, his jewelry, the very walls of his palaces bore the cryptic message. AEIOU, people whispered, scholars puzzled, and centuries later, historians still debate its true meaning. The most popular interpretations, Austria Universo, it is Austria's destiny to rule the whole world, or Alles Erdreich ist Österreich, paint a picture of an ambition so vast it felt almost comical to none from a man who often struggled to control his own dukes. Let alone the world, Frederick was not known for grand military triumph. He was, by many accounts, a rather slow and indecisive ruler. He spent his days in quiet contemplation, often drawing constellations or designing new gadgets, while the Holy Roman Empire he supposedly led fractured around him. Yet this quiet, unassuming man clung to a vision of global domination. A destiny, he believed, was laid out for his house. His court in Wiener Neustadt was often a place of quiet industry, not the boisterous hubbub of a conquering empire. He would walk through his gardens, his mind perhaps wandering to the stars above, or perhaps to the vast unseen lands he believed Austria was destined to command. He had a particular fondness for growing new kinds of fruits, experimenting with grafts, a painstaking process that required patience and a belief in future. Yields. It was a metaphor perhaps for his dynastic ambitions, slow, steady, and ultimately fruitful across generations. The reality of Frederick's reign was far from global dominance. His cousin, Sigismund, often caused him headaches in Tyrol. Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus constantly encroached upon his lands, at one point even seizing Vienna itself, forcing Frederick to wander like a homeless king through his own empire. Can you imagine the supposed ruler of the world sketching his motto on the walls of makeshift lodgings, while his capital city was occupied by an enemy king? He had a deep personal affection for his imperial regalia, the crown, the scepter, the orb. He'd often touch them, polish them, as if by physical contact he could imbue himself with the power they represented, a power that often felt just out of his grasp. He believed these objects, ancient and sacred, connected him directly to Charlemagne and the Roman emperors of old, legitimizing his grand claims. Despite his present difficulties, Frederick's tenacity, however quiet, was legendary. He outlived all his enemies, a feat in itself during those turbulent times. He was like an ancient oak tree, slow to grow, perhaps twisted and gnarled by the storms of life, but ultimately unyielding. When others died, lost battles, or faded from power, Frederick simply remained. He had a curious habit of writing down every single expense, every little detail of his daily life, in tiny, meticulous script in his personal journals. It was a stark contrast to the grand, sweeping ambition of his motto. He was a man of small, precise habits, yet harbored the largest dreams for his family. He married his son Maximilian to Mary of Burgundy, heiress to vast rich territories in the Low Countries. This was a masterstroke of diplomacy, not conquest, and it brought immense wealth and prestige to the Habsburgs, a significant step toward the global empire his motto suggested. The wedding itself was a spectacle of medieval grandeur, a dazzling display of silks, jewels, and heraldry, but beneath the surface it was a calculated move, a gamble that paid off handsomely. Maximilian, a vibrant, chivalrous young man, was everything his father wasn't. Menaced, adventurous, and a gifted warrior, Frederick saw in his son the embodiment of the active, conquering spirit that he himself lacked, but believed was essential for the future of his house. Yet he continued to add AEIOU to every new building, every piece of art commissioned for the imperial court. It was a whisper of a promise, a secret prayer, a prophecy he was trying to manifest through sheer persistence. Even in his later years, when gout crippled him and forced him to be carried in a litter, Frederick's quiet resolve endured. He often sat in his chamber, surrounded by his books and astronomical instruments, gazing out at the distant mountains, perhaps contemplating the unseen frontiers of his potential empire. He wasn't a king of grand pronouncements or dramatic speeches. His power lay in his stillness, his patience, and that enduring, enigmatic phrase, AEIOU, is more than a motto. It was a dynasty's generational whisper, passed down through the centuries, a silent command for future Habsburgs to aim higher, to reach further, to truly make the world subject to Austria, even if their old, quiet ancestor could only dream it. Number 7. Plus ultra. Further beyond. Emperor Charles V, grandson of Frederick III's adventurous son, Maximilian, stood at the pinnacle of Habsburg power. His empire, inherited through a dazzling series of dynastic marriages, was so vast that the sun literally never set on it. From the silver mines of Mexico to the bustling ports of Antwerp, from the ancient cities of Spain to the battlefields of Germany, Charles ruled it all. His personal motto, plus ultra, was etched onto his coat of arms, famously placed on the Pillars of Hercules, the mythological boundary of the known world. It was a bold declaration, an instruction to push beyond limits, a defiance of the old world superstitions that the ocean's edge meant the end. Charles was a man of immense personal responsibility, a burden that seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. He inherited a jumble of kingdoms, each with its own language, customs, and laws. He spoke several languages, Flemish from his childhood in Ghent, Spanish as he came of age, French and Latin, always adapting, always trying to bridge the vast cultural gaps of his dominion. He was a restless ruler, constantly traveling across his empire, sailing tempestuous seas, riding for weeks on end, across muddy roads. He rarely stayed in one place for long, moving his court from Spain to Germany to Italy to the Low Countries, like a human knot trying to tie his disparate realms together. His personal baggage train was legendary, filled not just with clothes and treasures, but with administrative documents, maps, and the apparatus of governance that followed him everywhere. The weight of ruling such an empire was immense. Charles was constantly at war, with France over Italy, with the Ottoman Empire threatening his eastern borders, and most significantly with the Protestant Reformation tearing apart the religious fabric of his German territories. He was a devout Catholic, and the rise of Martin Luther was a deep personal affront to his belief in a unified Christendom. He spent countless hours in negotiation, in council meetings, often hunched over maps, his brow furrowed, trying to find solutions to problems that seemed to multiply with every sunrise. His diet was famously heavy, a preference for rich meats and strong wines which contributed to his lifelong battle with gout, a painful affliction that often confined him to his chair, even as the world around him demanded his constant movement. One dramatic example of his plus ultra spirit came with the expeditions into the New World. While Columbus had sailed before him, it was under Charles V that the vast empires of the Aztecs and Incas were conquered, their treasures pouring into the Spanish coffers. He personally backed Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe, a monumental journey that truly pushed beyond the known limits of the world, proving its spherical nature and opening up new, unimagined trade routes. The maps in his study in Seville must have been ever expanding, new lines and names appearing almost daily, each dot a new conquest, a new land brought under his sway. He had a deep fascination with cartography, spending hours tracing the new coastlines, imagining the vast unknown interiors. Yet despite this outward expansion, Charles felt the internal strain. He suffered from severe indigestion and chronic headaches, often retreating to his private chambers where he would pray for hours, seeking divine guidance for the impossible decisions he faced. The very expansion of his empire, the very plus ultra that defined his ambition, also brought with it unending challenges. The logistics of governing and defending such a vast domain were staggering. He had to raise armies across different cultures, finance wars from disparate treasuries, and negotiate with endlessly squabbling local lords and powerful bankers, like the Fuggers who held immense sway over his finances. In 1556, exhausted and disillusioned, Charles V did something almost unheard of for a monarch of his stature. He abdicated. He split his empire between his son, Philip II of Spain, and his brother Ferdinand I, who received the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrian lands. He then retired to a small monastery in Eustace, Spain, a quiet retreat nestled in the hills. Even there, his fascination with the further beyond didn't quite leave him. He pursued his hobbies with the same intensity he had governed. He tinkered with clocks, trying to achieve perfect synchronization, a symbolic quest for order in a world he had found so chaotic. He studied his own approaching death with a scientific curiosity, even organizing his own funeral rites while still alive. Charles V, a man whose life was defined by pushing limits, ultimately pushed beyond the limits of kingship itself, seeking a spiritual peace that even the vastness of his empire could not provide. His plus ultra was not just about geographical expansion, but perhaps in the end about the limits of human endurance and the search for something beyond the temporal world. Number 6. Viribus Unitis, with united forces. Franz Joseph I ascended to the Habsburg throne in 1848, a year of revolutions and upheaval across Europe. He was just 18 years old, a fresh-faced youth thrust into a maelstrom of political unrest and social change. His personal motto, Viribus Unitis, became the guiding principle of his incredibly long reign, which stretched for 68 years, witnessing the dramatic transformation of the world from gaslight to electricity, from a world of empires to the brink of global war. He sincerely believed that only by unifying the diverse peoples and traditions of his vast, multi-ethnic empire could it survive. From the very beginning, Franz Joseph faced immense challenges. Hungary, the second largest component of his empire, was in open rebellion, demanding greater autonomy. Italy, a collection of states loosely connected to the Habsburg crown, yearned for unification. The empire was a patchwork quilt of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, and many more, each with their own language, culture, and aspirations. Managing this complex mosaic required incredible diplomacy, patience, and a constant effort to balance competing interests. He understood that forcing uniformity would only breed resentment, yet allowing too much independence could lead to fragmentation. It was a tightrope walk every single day. Franz Joseph was a creature of habit, a man defined by duty and routine. He rose before dawn, often at 4 a.m., even in his old age, to work on state papers. His office at Schönbrunn Palace was Spartan, not lavish, reflecting his no-nonsense approach to governance. He ate simple meals, dressed in military uniforms, for much of his life, and spent hours signing documents, reviewing reports, and meeting with ministers. His daily schedule was practically immutable, a testament to his belief that stability came from order and tireless work. He rode his horse daily even when the weather was foul, believing it kept his mind clear and his body strong enough to bear the weight of the crown. The united forces he sought to command were often fractious. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which created the dual monarchy, was a monumental effort to appease the Hungarians and bring stability. It granted Hungary significant autonomy, establishing two separate parliaments and governments under one monarch. This was a radical step, an attempt to unite two distinct powers within one framework, a political innovation born of necessity. Franz Joseph embraced it, often traveling to Budapest, addressing the Hungarian parliament in their own language, learning phrases to show respect for their culture. He even tried to learn Czech, but found it too difficult. A small but telling sign of the immense challenge of uniting so many diverse peoples. Tragedy seemed to stalk the imperial family, testing Franz Joseph's personal resilience and by extension the unity of his house. His beloved wife, Empress Elizabeth Sisi, was a free spirit who chafed against the rigid court life and eventually became a restless wanderer. Her assassination in 1898 deeply grieved him, leaving a profound void in his life. His only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, committed suicide in a scandalous incident at Merling in 1889, a blow that nearly broke the aging emperor. These personal losses, immense and public, underscored the fragility of even the most powerful dynasties. Each time, Franz Joseph retreated into himself, but then resurfaced stoic and unwavering, returning to his duties as if the sheer force of his will could hold his empire together, even as his personal world crumbled its long reign. He presided over the building of railways that crisscrossed his empire, connecting distant regions and fostering economic growth, hoping to literally bind his peoples together with iron and steam. Vienna itself was transformed under his rule, with a magnificent Ringstrasse built, shining grand public buildings, museums, and opera houses, intended to be symbols of imperial prestige and shared culture. He even became one of the first monarchs to own an automobile, though he preferred his horse-drawn carriage. The irony was palpable. While his empire was modernizing at a rapid pace, its political structures struggled to keep up with the demands of a changing world where nationalism was on the rise, often overshadowing the call for unity. By the early 20th century, the united forces were showing dangerous cracks. The assassination of his nephew and heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, in Sarajevo in 1914, was the final, devastating blow. Despite his personal grief and deep weariness, Franz Joseph signed a declaration of war against Serbia, a decision that plunged Europe into World War I. He passed away in 1916, 2 years before the empire he had held together for so long finally disintegrated. His motto, Viribus Unitas, echoed his tireless effort to preserve a sprawling, diverse empire through sheer force of will and a relentless dedication to duty. He believed to his dying day that if everyone simply did their part, if the disparate peoples could find a common ground, then the empire could endure. His life was a testament to that unwavering, heartbreaking belief. Number 5. Justitia et Pietas. Justice and Piety. Ferdinand I, the younger brother of the mighty Emperor Charles V, inherited a different kind of burden. When Charles abdicated in 1556, he split his vast empire, ceding the Spanish and New World territories to his son Philip, and the Austrian lands in the Holy Roman Empire to Ferdinand. Ferdinand's domain was sprawling, encompassing Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and the fragmented German states. His personal motto, Justitia et Pietas, spoke to his deep-seated belief in the twin pillars of good governance, upholding the law fairly for all subjects, and demonstrating unwavering devotion to God. In an era ripped apart by the Protestant Reformation, these values were not just abstract concepts. They were crucial for survival. Ferdinand was a man of contrast to his more famous brother. Where Charles was restless and globe-trotting, Ferdinand was a steadfast administrator, often preferring the quiet work of diplomacy and lawmaking over grand military campaigns. He was educated in Spain, imbued with a strong sense of Catholic faith and a rigorous intellectual discipline. He spoke Latin, German, and Spanish fluently, and possessed a remarkable ability to mediate disputes, a skill that proved invaluable in managing the unruly patchwork of the Holy Roman Empire. He established his court in Vienna, transforming it into a center of culture and administration. His personal library was extensive, filled with works on theology, law, and classical philosophy. Reflecting his intellectual pursuits, the issue of pietas, or piety, was central to his reign. The Reformation had swept through Germany, and many princes within the Holy Roman Empire had converted to Protestantism, creating deep divisions and threatening the unity of the empire. Ferdinand, a staunch Catholic, found himself in a delicate position. He believed deeply in the Catholic Church, but he also understood that outright repression would lead to endless civil war. He was a pragmatist. He navigated these treacherous waters with remarkable patience, often engaging in theological debates with Protestant theologians, not with the intention of converting them by force, but to understand their arguments and find common ground where possible. His sense of justitia, or justice, was demonstrated by his approach to these religious conflicts. He did not seek to crush his Protestant subjects, but sought a legal framework for coexistence. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555, signed shortly before he formally became emperor, established the principle of cuius regio eius religio, whose realm, his religion, allowing rulers to choose the religion of their territory. While this did not achieve perfect religious harmony, it was a vital step towards formalizing a fragile peace, preventing further widespread conflict for decades. Ferdinand upheld this peace even when it went against his personal religious convictions, believing that the stability of the empire, the justice for all its diverse populations, was paramount. He made sure legal channels were open for grievances, even for those of different faiths. Ferdinand was a hands-on ruler. He personally revised the Code of Law for Bohemia, modernizing its legal system. He worked tirelessly to standardize administration across his disparate lands, creating a more efficient bureaucracy, recognizing that fair and consistent application of the law was crucial for stability. He was known for his calm demeanor in negotiations, his ability to listen to all sides, and his careful, considered judgments. He often spent hours in his study poring over legal texts and diplomatic correspondence, his spectacles perched on his nose, a quill scratching across parchment. He valued expert opinions and surrounded himself with skilled jurists and theologians. His family life also reflected his values. He was devoted to his wife, Anna of Bohemia and Hungary, and together they had 15 children. He ensured their children received a thorough education, emphasizing both religious instruction and practical governance. He often held family councils where even his daughters were encouraged to participate in discussions about the state of the empire. He saw his family as a microcosm of his larger empire, a place where diverse personalities and interests had to be harmonized through a spirit of fairness and shared purpose. He held court with a quiet dignity, emphasizing solemnity and order over lavish display, fostering an atmosphere where serious matters of state were discussed with gravity and respect. Ferdinand's focus on justitia et pietas was not always easy. He faced constant pressure from the papacy and conservative Catholic elements to take a harder line against Protestants. He also faced the constant threat of the Ottoman Empire, which launched repeated invasions into Hungary. He often had to juggle the demands of defending his borders with maintaining internal peace. He understood that a just internal policy was essential for gathering the unified forces needed to defend against external threats. He had to raise taxes and conscript soldiers, and to do so without inciting rebellion required a degree of perceived fairness and legitimate authority. His life was a testament to the idea that true strength lay not in brute force, but in the steady application of law tempered by a genuine concern for the spiritual well-being of his people. Even if that meant tolerating beliefs different from his own, he was the quiet anchor of the Habsburgs, ensuring their survival in an age of religious upheaval through the power of reason and moderation. Number 4. Virtute et exemplum, by virtue and example. Leopold, the first Holy Roman Emperor from 1658 to 1705, was not initially groomed for the throne. His elder brother, Ferdinand IV, was the chosen heir destined for greatness, but fate, as it often does in royal courts, took a cruel turn. Ferdinand IV died young, leaving the quiet, studious Leopold to step into the immense shoes of his father, Ferdinand III. Leopold's motto, Virtute et exemplum, signaled his approach to rule. He would lead not through dazzling military victories, gormatic speeches, but through his personal integrity, his profound learning. He was fluent in several languages, including Latin, German, Italian, and Spanish. He was deeply passionate about music, composed his own operas and oratorios, and played several instruments. His court in Vienna became a vibrant center for the arts, particularly Baroque music, which flourished under his patronage. He often spent his evenings discussing philosophy, theology, and science with scholars and artists, fostering an atmosphere of intellectual pursuit. He was a keen collector of books and scientific instruments, his private study overflowing with globes, telescopes, and texts on every conceivable subject. He had a particular fascination with alchemy, the ancient quest to turn base metals into gold, a pursuit that blended scientific curiosity with spiritual yearning. Despite his scholarly leanings, Leopold was thrust into an era of relentless warfare. His reign was dominated by conflicts, the constant threat from the Ottoman Empire on his eastern borders, and the ambitious King Louis XIV of France, who sought to expand his power at Habsburg expense in the West. The long, brutal Great Turkish War, culminating in the Siege of Vienna in 1683, tested Leopold and his empire to their very limits. Vienna itself was surrounded by Ottoman forces, its walls battered, its people facing starvation. Leopold, a devout man, prayed constantly, seeking divine intervention. He ultimately had to flee Vienna with his court, a deeply humiliating experience for an emperor. Yet, it was in these moments of crisis that Leopold's virtute et exemplum truly shone. He did not panic. He maintained a calm demeanor, rallied his allies, and ultimately, with the help of Polish King John III Sobieski, the Ottomans were decisively defeated at the Battle of Kallenberg, just outside Vienna. This victory, a turning point in European history, saved Central Europe from Ottoman conquest. Leopold was not a warrior king in the mold of his ancestors, but his steadfastness, his faith, and his ability to inspire loyalty in his generals and allies through his personal conduct proved to be a powerful form of leadership. He believed in divine providence, seeing the victory as a sign of God's favor on his virtuous rule. Leopold's approach to governance was meticulous and deeply ethical. He was known for his personal piety, attending Mass daily and living a life of relative austerity compared to the lavishness of his contemporary, Louis XIV. He banned dueling at his court, promoting a culture of order and respect. He was deeply concerned with the welfare of his subjects, even if he often struggled to address the immense poverty and disease that plagued parts of his empire during these long wars. He understood that a ruler's moral standing was as important as his military might in maintaining legitimacy. He ensured justice was applied fairly, listening patiently to petitions from common folk, even if the wheels of bureaucracy often ground slowly. His family life, though marked by numerous infant deaths, a common tragedy of the era, was generally stable. He had a deep devotion to his third wife, Eleanor Magdalene of Pfalz-Neuburg, a woman of equally strong piety and intellect. Their shared commitment to faith and their children was a bedrock of stability in his otherwise tumultuous life. He personally oversaw the education of his sons, Joseph and Charles, ensuring they were well versed in languages, history, and the arts, preparing them to continue the Habsburg legacy of virtuous rule. He taught them by example, showing them the immense dedication required to lead such a vast and complex dominion. Leopold's reign was a period of immense growth for the Habsburgs. Despite the wars, the empire expanded significantly, reclaiming much of Hungary from the Ottoman. He strengthened the central administration, reformed the army, and laid the groundwork for the future expansion of Habsburg power. He was a master of diplomacy, skillfully balancing the powers of Europe, often through complex marriage alliances. He carefully arranged the marriage of his son Joseph to Wilhelmina Amalia of Brunswick-Lüneburg and his younger son Charles to Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, reinforcing alliances and securing the future of the dynasty. By the time of his death, Leopold I had become known as the Great Leopold, a testament to his long, challenging, and ultimately successful reign. He left an empire far stronger and more unified than he had inherited, all achieved through a quiet, consistent commitment to virtute et exemplum. He believed that a ruler's moral compass and personal integrity were the true foundations of a lasting empire, a belief he embodied until his last breath, earning the respect of his subjects and leaving a powerful legacy for his successors. Number 3. Recta tuitio. Right. Protection. Maria Theresa, a woman who would shatter centuries of male-dominated rule, ascended to the Habsburg throne in 1740. She was a young woman of 23, charming, intelligent, and already a mother, but seemingly unprepared for the storm that was about to break. Her father, Emperor Charles VI, had spent his life securing the Pragmatic Sanction, a document designed to ensure her succession to the Habsburg hereditary lands, as the Holy Roman Empire still excluded women. But no sooner was her father buried than all of Europe seemed to forget their promises. Her personal motto, Recta tuitio, meaning right protection or proper defense, became a fiercely held promise to herself and her people. She would defend her inheritance, her family, and her subjects no matter the cost. The moment Maria Theresa took power, Prussia's ambitious young king Frederick II, later known as Frederick the Great, invaded Silesia, a rich Habsburg province. This act ignited the War of the Austrian Succession, a brutal conflict that lasted 8 years and drew in most of Europe. Maria Theresa, pregnant with her 4th child, stood firm. She faced a seemingly insurmountable coalition: Prussia, France, Bavaria, and Saxony, all eager to carve up her weakened empire. Her treasury was empty, her army dilapidated, and her generals uninspired. It was a terrifying position for any monarch, let alone a young, untested woman. She famously rode to Pressburg, the Hungarian capital, and addressed the Hungarian Diet, her voice ringing with determination. She presented her infant son, Joseph, to the assembled magnates, pleading for their loyalty and aid. The Hungarian nobles, moved by her courage and vulnerability, famously pledged their vitam et sanguinem, our life and blood. This moment, more than any other, cemented her image as a fierce protectress, willing to fight for what was hers. She learned to ride a horse, to review troops, to study military maps, transforming herself from a sheltered princess into a resolute commander-in-chief, all while bearing 16 children. Her daily schedule was a whirlwind of state affairs, military strategy, and maternal duties. She often worked late into the night, her candlelight visible from outside her private study in Schönbrunn Palace. Maria Theresa was not just a defender of borders, she was a fierce protector of her people and their future. Once the immediate threat of war subsided, she embarked on a sweeping program of reforms, recognizing that only a strong, modernized state could truly offer right protection. She overhauled the army, establishing a military academy, the Theresian Military Academy still in operation today, and investing heavily in training and equipment. She reformed the tax system, ensuring that even the nobility paid their fair share, a deeply unpopular but necessary move. She transformed the justice system, abolishing torture and establishing clear legal codes. She also placed a strong emphasis on education, establishing schools for both boys and girls, believing that an educated populace was essential for a strong empire. She founded the University of Innsbruck and reformed the University of Vienna, elevating it to a leading institution of higher learning. Her personal life was intertwined with her reign. She was deeply devoted to her husband Francis Stephen of Lorraine, whom she truly loved, a rarity in royal marriages of the time. His death in 1765 plunged her into a lifelong mourning, symbolized by her decision to wear black for the rest of her life. She was a hands-on mother, despite the demands of her empire, overseeing the upbringing of her many children, including the future Emperor Joseph II and the infamous Marie Antoinette of France. She was known for her directness, her booming laugh, and her occasional outbursts of temper, but also for her deep empathy and genuine concern for her subjects. She walked through the gardens of Schönbrunn, often engaging with the gardeners and servants, asking about their families, a directness that endeared her to many. She famously resisted the ideas of the Enlightenment that were sweeping Europe, particularly its anti-clerical aspects. Her rectitude extended to her deep Catholic faith, which she saw as a moral foundation for her rule and a protective shield for her people. She purged her court of Enlightenment thinkers and insisted on strong religious education. Yet she was also a pragmatist, willing to adopt modern administrative techniques and foster economic growth. She encouraged trade and industry, building new roads and canals, creating a more interconnected and prosperous empire, all aimed at strengthening its defenses and securing its future. By the end of her 40-year reign, Maria Theresa had transformed the Habsburg monarchy from a collection of vulnerable, disparate lands into a powerful, centralized state. She secured her dynasty's future through a combination of military resilience, shrewd diplomacy, and far-reaching internal reforms. Her rectitude was not just a motto for war, but a lifelong commitment to the well-being and security of her vast and diverse empire. She was a ruler who defied expectations, protected her people fiercely, and laid the foundations for generations of Habsburg rule, a true matriarch of an empire. Number 2, fides, spes, caritas, faith, hope, charity. Ferdinand II, Holy Roman Emperor from 1619 to 1637, was a man consumed by his fervent Catholic faith. In an age of deepening religious schism, his personal motto, fides, spes, caritas, faith, hope, charity, was not merely an inscription on a coat of arms. It was the very creed by which he lived and ruled. He believed with every fiber of his being that he was chosen by God to restore the Catholic Church to its rightful dominance throughout his domains, even if it meant plunging Europe into the bloodiest conflict it had ever seen, the 30 Years' War. Ferdinand grew up in a devout Jesuit environment steeped in the principles of the Counter-Reformation. He was educated at the Jesuit University in Ingolstadt, where he absorbed the rigid doctrines of the Catholic Church and developed an unshakable conviction that Protestantism was a heresy to be eradicated. He attended Mass daily, often spent hours in prayer, and was known for his personal austerity. His court in Vienna was not a place of frivolous entertainment, but of solemn religious observance. He surrounded himself with confessors and theologians, seeking constant spiritual guidance. He believed that God had placed him on the throne for a singular purpose: to defend and propagate the true faith. When he inherited the various Habsburg lands, especially Bohemia, he immediately began to enforce strict Catholic conformity. He closed Protestant churches, expelled Protestant preachers, and mandated Catholic worship. This was a radical departure from the more tolerant policies of his predecessors, like his grandfather, Ferdinand I. The Bohemian nobility, largely Protestant, saw this as a direct attack on their traditional rights and religious freedom. In 1618, their frustration boiled over in the infamous defenestration of Prague, where two of Ferdinand's Catholic officials were thrown out of a castle window. This act of defiance sparked the Bohemian Revolt, the opening salvo of the 30 Years' War. Ferdinand II, far from being intimidated, saw this as a holy war, a divinely ordained conflict. His fides gave him absolute certainty in his cause. He refused to compromise, believing that to do so would be to betray God himself. He raised armies, formed alliances, and poured all the resources of his empire into the conflict. He relied heavily on his powerful general, Albrecht von Wallenstein, a brilliant but ruthless mercenary who commanded vast armies and operated almost as an independent power within the emperor's service. Ferdinand would spend hours in his private chapel praying for victory. Convinced that God was on his side, he often wore a simple rosary around his neck, a constant reminder of his spiritual mission. The spes, or hope, that drove him was the vision of a unified, Catholic Holy Roman Empire, a return to the religious harmony of medieval Christendom. He hoped that through military victory, through the re-establishment of Catholic worship, a new era of peace and piety would dawn. This hope sustained him through the horrors of war. The widespread famine, the ravages of disease, the endless destruction of towns and villages, the millions of lives lost. He received constant reports of the devastation, but his unwavering faith provided him with an interpretive lens. It was a test, a purification, a necessary tribulation before the ultimate triumph of God's will. His caritas, or charity, was expressed primarily within the framework of his faith. He was generous to Catholic institutions, funding churches, monasteries, and schools. He saw this as an act of love for God and for the souls of his subjects, even those who resisted his religious policies. He believed that by forcing them back to Catholicism, he was saving their eternal souls, an act of supreme charity in his eyes. He personally attended to the spiritual needs of his family and close advisors, offering counsel and encouragement rooted in his deep piety. However, this charitable impulse rarely extended to religious toleration or mercy for those who actively opposed his vision. For Ferdinand, there could be no charity for heresy. The war raged on throughout his reign, involving almost every major European power. Battles like White Mountain, 1620, brought crushing victories for the imperial forces, leading to the brutal suppression of the Bohemian nobility and the forced conversion or expulsion of Protestants from Bohemia. His Edict of Restitution in 1629 aimed to reclaim all church lands secularized since 1552, a move that infuriated Protestant princes and reignited the war. He was relentless, driven by an inner fire that burned hotter than any political calculation. He often ignored the advice of his more pragmatic advisors, convinced that his spiritual convictions were a higher guide. By the time of his death in 1637, the 30 Years' War was far from over. His rigid adherence to fides, spes, caritas, had plunged his empire into an existential struggle, decimating its population and devastating its lands. Yet to his dying day, Ferdinand II remained convinced that he had followed God's will. He lived a life of unwavering principle, a testament to the immense power of personal belief, for good or ill, to shake the destiny of nations. He bequeathed to his son, Ferdinand III, an empire exhausted by war, but still clinging to its Catholic identity, a testament to his own fierce, unyielding convictions. Number 1. Pro Dio et Imperio, for God and Empire. The story of the Habsburg motto, Pro Dio et Imperio, for God and Empire, stretches back to the very roots of the dynasty, long before the double-headed eagle graced their standards. While not tied to one single emperor as explicitly as some later mottos, this phrase captures the enduring fundamental belief that propelled the early Habsburgs from obscure Swiss counts to rulers of vast European territory. It was the driving force behind men like Rudolf I, who in the late 13th century snatched the imperial crown and laid the foundation for centuries of Habsburg power, believing his family's destiny was intertwined with both divine favor and the imperial mission. He was a count from the remote Alsace region, a relatively minor noble, when he was unexpectedly elected King of the Romans, the future Holy Roman Emperor, in 1273. His election was a compromise, seen by the powerful German princes as a way to avoid choosing a stronger, more threatening candidate. They believed they could control this provincial count. They were profoundly mistaken. Rudolf, a seasoned warrior and a shrewd politician, had a clear vision to establish his family, the Habsburgs, as a dominant force in the fragmented Holy Roman Empire. His pro Dio et Imperio was not a fancy phrase for a banner, but a practical spiritual mandate that guided every decision he made. His belief in Dio God was fundamental. Medieval monarchs drew their legitimacy directly from God, and Rudolf was no exception. He presented himself as a pious ruler, a defender of the church, and a restorer of order. After a long period of interregnum when the empire had lacked a strong emperor, he cultivated close ties with the papacy, seeking their blessing and support. He understood that spiritual authority underpinned temporal power. He would attend long church services, kneeling for hours, seeking divine guidance for the complex political maneuvers ahead. He often made pilgrimages to holy sites, demonstrating his devotion, publicly reinforcing his image as a God-fearing ruler. The Imperio, empire, part of his motto was his practical ambition. Rudolf knew that the imperial title alone, without strong territorial power, was a hollow crown. His great target became Ottokar II of Bohemia, a powerful and ambitious king who had accumulated vast lands, including Austria, Styria, and Carinthia, provinces that were historically part of the empire, but effectively outward-stayed in part of Tau. Rudolf saw this as an affront to imperial authority and a golden opportunity for his family. He waged a fierce war against Ottokar, culminating in the Battle of Marchfeld in 1278, a decisive victory where Ottokar was killed. This triumph was a game-changer. After the victory, Rudolf did not simply annex these rich lands to the empire's general domain. He skillfully maneuvered to bestow Austria, Styria, and Carinthia upon his own sons as hereditary fiefs. This act, often called the Foundation of Austria, was the true beginning of the Habsburgs' rise from provincial nobility to major European power. It was a strategic masterstroke, marrying the imperial mission of restoring order with the dynastic ambition of acquiring territory. He understood that to protect the empire, he first had to build a strong base for his own family, capable of defending it. He personally oversaw the administration of these new lands, ensuring their loyalty and integration into the Habsburg fold. Rudolf's reign was characterized by relentless travel from one corner of his vast decentralized empire to another. He held numerous diets and courts, mediating disputes between warring princes, restoring imperial justice, and collecting taxes, always with an eye towards strengthening the imperial authority that was now embodied by his house. He was a practical, pragmatic ruler, often dressed in simple clothes, known for his directness, and even his gruff humor. He famously ate meals with his soldiers, sharing their rations, fostering a sense of camaraderie and loyalty that was rare among emperors of his time. He was a strong, imposing figure, with a deep scar on his face, a testament to his many years as a knight and warrior. He never achieved a coronation as Holy Roman Emperor in Rome, despite his efforts. A symbolic goal for medieval rulers, yet his legacy was far more profound than a mere ceremony. He established the principle that the Habsburgs were the rightful heirs to the imperial throne, linking their family fortunes directly to the destiny of the Holy Roman Empire itself. His sons and grandsons continued his work, building on the foundation he laid, expanding their territorial holdings through strategic marriages and shrewd diplomacy, often through means less violent than Rudolph's battles, but always with the same underlying belief. The motto Pro Dio et Imperio became ingrained in the Habsburg psyche. It justified their expansion, their wars against the Ottomans, their zealous defense of Catholicism during the Reformation. It provided a divine and imperial legitimacy to their quest for power, transforming what might have been mere dynastic ambition into a sacred mission. Rudolf I, the founder, believed that his family's ascent was not just for their own gain, but for the glory of God and the restoration of a fragmented empire. His life was a testament to the belief that the two were inseparable, and this foundational idea would echo through the centuries, guiding every Habsburg who followed in his formidable footsteps.